A majority of U.S. Supreme Court justices on Wednesday expressed doubt with skeptical questions over President Trump's sweeping global tariffs on U.S. trading partners. If the court rules against him, the Trump administration could have to refund some of the billions of dollars it's collected. South Korea's ruling and opposition lawmakers held a comprehensive policy inquiry into the country's record budget proposal, wrangling over the size of the spending and spending priorities. And the South Korean government on Thursday unveiled its proposal to cut greenhouse gas emissions by at least 50% by 2035 from 2018 levels. The Trump administration was seen to be facing skepticism from the U.S. Supreme Court during a hearing over the president's claim of a unilateral power to impose global tariffs. While an actual ruling could be weeks or even months away, legal experts say the outcome of the case remains uncertain. Our Lee Seung-jae starts us off.
The U.S. Supreme Court began hearings on Wednesday to decide whether President Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs on South Korea and other nations were legally justified. At the center of the case is whether Trump exceeded his presidential authority when he used tariffs as a central tool of his economic and foreign policy.
The power to impose tariffs is a core application of the power to regulate foreign commerce, which is what the phrase regulate importation in IEEPA naturally evokes.
Justices met at the Supreme Court building in Washington, D.C. to hear arguments from attorneys representing small businesses and 12 Democratic-leaning states that filed the lawsuit, as well as from government lawyers defending Trump's policy.
It's simply implausible that in enacting IEEPA, Congress handed the president the power to overhaul the entire tariff system and the American economy in the process, allowing him to set and reset tariffs on any and every product from any and every country at any and all times.
Lower courts, including the U.S. Court of International Trade and the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, had already ruled that Trump's global tariffs imposed using emergency powers were unlawful. The Supreme Court, now holding a 6-3 conservative majority, has in the past issued rulings favorable to Trump, but legal experts say the outcome of this case remains uncertain. The central issue is whether Trump's reliance on the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, which allows a president to regulate imports in response to a declared national emergency, provided a legitimate legal basis for his tariffs. On April 2nd, Trump declared an emergency, claiming that America's chronic trade deficits were a threat to national security and the economy. He then announced plans to impose so-called reciprocal tariffs on multiple foreign nations. During Wednesday's session, a majority of the justices appeared skeptical about the president's power to unilaterally impose such far-reaching tariffs. 3 conservative justices raised concerns about whether an emergency law could give Trump near limitless power to change import duties and affect global trade. The court's 3 liberal justices also voiced doubts, meaning that at least 2 conservative votes could move to limit Trump's authority, though not necessarily strike it down completely. Legal analysts say the decision in this case could redefine the scope of presidential authority in trade policy for years to come. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
South Korea's record-high budget proposal is now under scrutiny at the National Assembly as parties square off over spending levels and fiscal direction. Our Moon Hae-ryun has the details.
Ruling and opposition lawmakers held a comprehensive policy inquiry into South Korea's largest ever budget proposal on Thursday, sparring over its overall scale and spending priorities. Prime Minister Kim Min-seok and Finance Minister Koo Yoon-chol opened the session with remarks outlining the government's position on the 728 trillion won budget for 2026. Kim stressed the need for proactive fiscal measures to support growth and recovery, particularly in people's daily lives, while also addressing concerns over long-term fiscal sustainability.
In drawing up this year's budget, the government carried out a record 27 trillion won expenditure restructuring and prepared a range of measures to ensure fiscal sustainability.
He said the budget centers on 3 areas: building on innovative economy, strengthening the social foundation so all citizens can grow together, and bolstering national security and diplomacy with a focus on public safety and the national interest. Koo added remarks on the urgency of the situation and asked lawmakers to process the bill before the December 2nd deadline.
If key projects like developing advanced industries, reviving local economies, and easing household burdens are not carried out on time, the 728 trillion won budget cannot deliver its full impact.
The ruling Democratic Party echoed the government's view, arguing that the proposal puts meaningful resources toward cultivating long-term growth engines. But the main opposition, People Power Party, warns that expanded spending could undermine fiscal soundness. One PPP lawmaker also criticized the government's tariff agreement with the United States, which includes a $350 billion investment package, noting that National Assembly approval is required when policies impose a heavy financial burden on the state or the public. A DP lawmaker, meanwhile, pointed to rising domestic demand, improving consumer sentiment, and gains in the stock market as evidence of the Yi administration's economic achievements and justification for its expansionary fiscal approach. The policy inquiry continues Friday, with full deliberations for each government ministry set to begin next week. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
In other news, with the help of exports, South Korea yet again saw its account for September in the black. The Bank of Korea also forecasts this trend to continue despite the tariffs. Our Kim Do-yeon has more.
South Korea's current account surplus continued for the 29th month straight in September, driven by strong exports. The Bank of Korea announced Thursday that the preliminary current account surplus registered for the month stood at $13.47 billion, the largest for any previous September. This is also second highest monthly surplus for any month since the year 2000, and considering the surplus this year from January to September, it's the highest ever for the period, with $82.77 billion, about 23% higher than the same period last year.
The biggest factor here is the boom in semiconductor exports, as the industry has entered a super cycle. In non-IT items, while automobile exports to the U.S. have declined, the sector is performing well, supported by export diversification to Europe and other regions.
According to officials, this figure in September was driven by a $14.24 billion surplus in the goods account. Exports rose 9.6% from the previous year, while imports increased by 4.5%. Compared to the month before, it's up $4.84 billion. However, the services account deficit widened to $3.32 billion, larger than the previous month and the same month last year. This was partly because the transport balance swung to a deficit for the first time in 5 months. Looking ahead, the central bank expects the surplus to shrink in October due to fewer working days from the Chuseok holiday, but forecasts a return to a strong surplus trend for November and December. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
South Korea has dominated the CES 2026 Innovation Awards, securing 196 of the total 338 honors announced ahead of the trade show in Las Vegas. This accounts for nearly 58% of all the awards. South Korean firms also won 15 of the 30 Best of Innovation Awards, representing half of the highest honors. Now, leading the charge, Samsung Electronics announced on Thursday that it had won 27 awards, including a Best of Innovation Award in the visual display category for its 2026 TV and monitor products. Now, LG Electronics secured 18 innovation awards, including two Best of Innovation titles. The world's first wireless transparent LG Signature OLED TV was named a Best of Innovation product. This marks the fourth consecutive year an LG OLED TV has received the top honor. South Korea successfully wrapped up the APEC leaders meeting last week by not only having hosted global leaders, but also clinching promising deals that will allow Seoul to move one step closer to becoming a leading AI powerhouse. Now, one of these being a supply contract with NVIDIA for its GPU chips. We discuss more with our Park Junan in the studio. Welcome, Junan.
Great to be back, Tommy.
So, Junan, let's start with the NVIDIA's agreement on the GPU chips and why it's so significant for South Korea's advancement in the whole AI ecosystem.
Sure, Tommy. So at this year's APEC CEO Summit last Friday, NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang announced that the company will provide 50,000 advanced GPUs each to the South Korean government, Samsung Electronics, SK Group, and Hyundai Motor Group, along with 60,000 units to Neighbor Cloud. During the press briefing, Mr. Huang said, quote, "There's no question in my mind that Korea will build many more AI factories here, not just for the Korean industry, but also because Korea has a chance to be an AI hub for the region, and it has the ability to attract startups that are in other countries to be hosted on a Korea AI cloud." The company also projected that with the addition of 260,000 GPUs to the existing 45,000 here, bringing the total to over 300,000, South Korea's AI infrastructure and development capacity could expand by as much as 15-fold. Let's take a listen to what Presidential Senior Secretary for AI and Future Planning Ha Jung-woo had to say about last week's chip supply deal.
Artificial intelligence, from large language models to physical AI, demands tremendous computing power for training, which is why the NVIDIA GPUs will play a critical role. With 260,000 secured, South Korea now ranks among the global top 3, positioning us not just to build AI models, but to develop core AI technologies that drive innovation across industries.
Now, Junan, I do understand the government is hopeful that the deal will place South Korea among the global AI, top powerhouses. But what does it really mean in practical terms? I mean, how will it really strengthen South Korea's standing in the global AI race?
Right, Tommy. So although it might seem impressive to hold hundreds of thousands of GPUs, it is natural to wonder what this number actually signifies and what they will be used for. For example, AI factories can be run to advance intelligent manufacturing and digital transformation. They could also be used to power AI-driven mobility and advanced robotics. The applications are broad and varied, and there is no doubt that NVIDIA's high-performance GPUs are essential for handling vast amounts of data and carrying out large-scale computations. Let's take a listen to what a professor who studies AI has to say about what it means to acquire NVIDIA's GPUs.
Since NVIDIA holds nearly 90% of the global GPU market, high-performance GPUs, essential for advanced physical robots, can realistically only be sourced from NVIDIA. With tens of thousands of GPUs operating like supercomputers, data centers are being built to support large-scale AI training. As more of these systems are established, we expect South Korea's AI ecosystem to grow exponentially.
Well, it is definitely encouraging that South Korea has secured those advanced chips, but then walk us through how the chips will be actually used and possible challenges and hurdles ahead for us.
Right, Tommy. So I actually talked with an expert in the field of semiconductors, and what he told me is that there's a risk that South Korea could have the computing power through chips, but not having enough large-scale AI services or data to make full use of it. So let's take a listen.
Since South Korea doesn't have large platforms with hundreds of millions of active users like US big tech, it's uncertain whether the country can fully and efficiently utilize such massive GPU capacity. And while companies like Hyundai and Samsung may apply physical AI in manufacturing, it's still questionable whether each really needs as many as 50,000 units.
While he questioned their immediate applicability, he acknowledged that securing high-performance chips remains a decisive factor in the global race for AI leadership. Let's take a listen.
Since the 260,000 GPUs will be delivered gradually over several years, it could be feasible if companies like Samsung, Hyundai, and Naver, along with public institutions, keep updating and expanding their services as the chips come in.
Securing high-performance GPUs is certainly encouraging, but how they are used, for what purposes, and how effectively they are allocated will be a key factor shaping South Korea's future with AI.
Indeed, those are going to be the hallmarks for South Korea. Thank you, Junan, for coming in tonight. We appreciate it.
Always a pleasure, Dami.
Amid global efforts to curb greenhouse gas emissions, South Korea has revealed its own potential goals. With two final options on the table amid some controversy surrounding them, the government plans to make its final decision next week. Our Park Kwon-woo tells us more.
South Korea is just a few steps away from finalizing its 2035 greenhouse gas reduction target. That comes after the government on Thursday unveiled the two final options for its nationally determined contributions, narrowed down from 4 after extensive discussions. The choices are to cut emissions by either 50 to 60% or 53 to 60% compared to 2018. If reduced by at least 50%, the maximum level of total emissions in 2035 would be around 371 million tons, or 349 million tons if reduced by 53%. Considering last year's estimated emissions of nearly 700 million, there's still a long journey ahead within the next decade. The final target will be confirmed next week after review by the Presidential Commission on Carbon Neutrality and Green Growth and the Cabinet, and then submitted to the UN the following week, in line with the 2015 Paris Agreement that requires updated targets every 5 years. But disputes between industries and civic groups are expected to continue. Industry officials had pushed for a 48% cut, one of the 4 initial options previously, calling even that goal difficult to meet, while civic groups urged for reductions of up to 65%. As the Environment Ministry said Thursday that the government tried to balance the two sides, it's now up to the government's decision on how far Korea can go in protecting both the planet and its industries. Park Kwon-woo, Arirang News.
President Lee Jae-myung called for an early response once forest fires break out and urged the fire officials to thoroughly respond to put out the fire at the earliest stage possible. The president visited the eastern coastal areas of Gangwon-do Province today to inspect regions with a high risk of wildfires ahead of the dry winter season. He called for fire prevention measures and promised full government support. He also observed a joint fire extinguishing training exercise by the forest agency and the military using helicopters and drones, and spoke with the firefighters involved. And the number of multicultural marriages in Korea reached its highest level last year since the COVID-19 pandemic, while also marking the first increase in the number of multicultural births in 12 years. The Ministry of Data and Statistics said Thursday that the number of such births last year was 13,416, a 10.4% increase from the previous year. The multicultural births accounted for 5.6% of all births recorded. That's up 0.3 percentage points year on year. The ministry said the surge in the number of multicultural births was largely due to the rising trend in multicultural marriages, which have been subdued during the COVID-19 pandemic. The U.S. fired an ICBM on Wednesday after President Donald Trump had urged a restart of nuclear weapons testing for the first time in more than 30 years. Now, Russia responded with Putin ordering officials to draft a proposal on nuclear weapons testing. Our Kim Bo-kyung has more.
Just 6 days after President Donald Trump urged the U.S. military to restart nuclear weapons testing, the U.S. on Wednesday fired a Minuteman III intercontinental ballistic missile. According to the Air Force Global Strike Command, the unarmed nuclear-capable missile was launched from Vandenberg Space Force Base in California. The rocket traveled around 6,860 kilometers, landing near the Ronald Reagan Ballistic Missile Defense Test Site in the Marshall Islands. This follows after Trump announced on social media just 1 hour before holding a summit with Chinese President Xi Jinping on October 30th that he instructed the Pentagon to resume nuclear weapons testing. He did, however, hint at working on a joint denuclearization plan with Russia and China.
We did our nuclear. We're the #1 nuclear power, which I hate to admit because it's so horrible. We're maybe working on a plan to denuclearize the 3 of us, so we'll see if that works.
His remarks came during a Miami business forum and amid growing concerns about nuclear proliferation and strategic competition between the world's leading powers. No specific plan or details came out from the White House regarding his comments, though. Meanwhile, responding to the U.S., Russian President Vladimir Putin on the same day on Wednesday ordered his top officials to submit proposals on possible nuclear weapons testing. In a televised meeting with his Security Council, he said Moscow had always strictly adhered to the obligations not to do any tests, but it would do so if any other nuclear power had started.
Russia has always strictly adhered to its obligations under the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, and we have no plans to withdraw from it. At the same time, as I stated in my address to the Federal Assembly in 2023, should the United States or other treaty signatories conduct such tests, Russia would be compelled to take appropriate reciprocal measures.
Russian Defense Minister told Putin that Washington's recent remarks clearly demonstrate active buildup of strategic offensive weapons, with the chief of the General Staff adding Russia should respond effectively to such actions. To this, Putin asked all the ministries and relevant agencies to do everything necessary to collect additional information on this issue, analyze it, and draft proposals. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
Following another round of U.S. sanctions on North Korea this week, Pyongyang released a statement saying that the regime will wait out Washington rather than engage under current conditions. Our An Sung-jin tells us more.
North Korea said it will respond with strategic patience to what it calls Washington's unchanged hostility following the recent sanctions. According to its state media Korean Central News Agency on Thursday, Kim Mun-chul, Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs in charge of U.S. affairs, issued a statement that reiterated Pyongyang's position against what it called the deep-rooted hostility toward our state from the current U.S. administration. Kim added that the latest round of sanctions is the fifth unilateral sanctions package since the Trump administration took office, and denounced the U.S. for asserting pressure and coercion, which will have no impact on the North's position toward Washington. This comes as the U.S. Treasury Department announced this week new sanctions on individuals and institutions allegedly involved in laundering illicit funds from cybercrime operations to fund the North's weapons program. The State Department had also stated that it plans to pursue UN sanctions against foreign ships accused of helping transport North Korean coal and iron ore exports to China. Despite Trump's interest in reviving talks with Kim Jong-un, as the sanctions continue, Pyongyang's choice of strategic patience may suggest a sharp rhetoric and a renewed hardline approach. On the U.S. perspective, analysts say that the latest sanctions may signal stronger pressure on the regime after U.S.-North Korea talks failed to materialize during Trump's recent visit to Asia. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
There's a problem with ultrafine dust everywhere. From late afternoon, ultrafine dust gradually flew in from overseas, increasing the concentration mainly in the western areas. Uninvited ultrafine dust is expected to get worse overnight. This dusty air will stay until tomorrow morning and gradually fade as easterly winds clear the air in the afternoon. Mild autumn weather has been continuing across the country. Unlike the cool morning everywhere, the temperature rose rapidly under the autumn sunshine. With a daytime temperature of nearly 20 degrees Celsius in Seoul, a large daily temperature range appeared again. Seoul will start off at 9 degrees tomorrow morning, Daejeon at 7 degrees. Daily highs will rise up to 20 degrees in Seoul and Daejeon, 19 degrees in Daegu and Gyeongju. It will rain in eastern parts of Gangwon-do Province and along the east coast between late afternoon tomorrow and Saturday morning. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is all we have for tonight. I'm Kim Dami. From all of us here at Arirang, thanks for watching and good night.